Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Comic Arts Workshop. My name is Ramon Gill. I'm the organizer and founder. We started doing this back in June of 2017. Back then, we were doing it live in Chelsea, New York. And then COVID hit, and then we went online, and we found that it's actually more convenient for everybody involved to do it online. Though some people miss we try to do some events live, like we're gonna have our Christmas party live. But usually for the speakers events, I usually give the speakers a choice of live or Zoom. And in Sebastian's case, you're in California, so Zoom works out much better.
Absolutely.
So anyway, so like I said, my name is Ramon Gill. This is the Comic Arts Workshop. We have these monthly guest speakers. We used to have an actual course that we used to do, but my bandwidth has been that I haven't really been able to devote any time to running a course as well. So this 1 month guest speakers, except this month we had two. We had you, and we had oh god, my mind slips. Not Joyce Moy. Anyways, Joyce Wan, right? Children's book illustrator.
Oh, cool.
So today we have Sebastian, and we can get started. And everybody, please give a nice round of applause for Sebastian coming out to be with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Yes, Zoom is certainly an easier option than flying out there. So appreciate it.
Exactly. So Sebastian, could you please I did some research on your career, but let's hear it from you. Can you tell us a little bit about your career path up until this point?
Sure. So it all started in a summer's day when I really got into comics when I was like in 3rd and 4th grade. I'd been drawing my whole life, and I was drawing sequential stories before I even knew to call them comics, really. And then in 3rd and 4th grade, I just absolutely fell in love with comics, and that's the first thing I remember ever wanting to be when I grew up as a comic book creator. Obviously, I wasn't working professionally at that time, but that was, I had and I still have a bunch of those 8.5 by 11 pages that I stapled together, and that was my personal comic collection. And then I got really into like filmmaking. I wanted to be a filmmaker. It made sense to me that like it's all visual storytelling. I would draw the storyboards, and then it was like I would film it, and so it was bringing a comic book to life. So it all made sense. Fast forward, I came out to LA to be an actor. Actually, I had no friends as a kid making those movies, so I just put myself in everything. And I was like, hey, I kind of like this. So I came out to LA to be an actor. But as soon as I got out here, I joined a couple theater companies, a sketch comedy troupe, and I just started writing a lot. Is kind of the point. I was just doing a ton of writing. And then at one of my day jobs, I found myself sitting next to somebody who had all the same interests. And I shared with him this idea that I had called Penguins versus Possums that I'd done in college. And I'd done a bunch of stuff with it, but no comics. And he was into comics as well. And so we were kind of just like, you know what, let's do a comic. Let's do Penguins versus Possums, and we'll take it to Long Beach Comic Con, and we'll see what happens. And so that was really my putting my foot in the pond of comic books. And
what year was this?
So this was 2011 actually. And we went to that Long Beach Comic Con, and I fell in love with it. Like we self-published the first 4 issues of that series. And then a publisher who is now known as Fanbase Press, we were all in the same circles, and they reached out and asked if we wanted to join forces and they could publish the rest of Penguins versus Possums. And so we said yes. And so it was me and John and Lindsay were the 3 people working on Penguins versus Possums. And so we were then published through Fanbase Press. We did 8 issues in total. We had 2 trades that came out, a bunch of little figurines and other stuff, t-shirts and stuff to promote it. But we did that. Around that, as that was ending, I had my eyes set on what was coming next. Did that for a few years, and I also at the same time was working as an illustrator on other people's projects. So I would try and cobble together, a career with comics of like sometimes working a day job, sometimes for a while I was completely dedicated to being an artist and an illustrator. So I'd do any illustrator job that came my way. And so I was illustrating other people's comics. I was providing art for TV shows. I was doing, all kinds of stuff, whatever I could find. I as Penguins versus Possums was wrapping up, I wanted to create another series, and I knew that I wanted to do something that really amplified and that really showed my culture and my heritage and put it in a positive light. Um, Especially at that time, there was just seemed to be a lot of negativity around being Latino and in the media, and so I really wanted to put that forward, and that ended up becoming Quince. I can go into more of that later, but then so that was Quince, and I collaborated with a couple awesome people on that, Kit and Emma Steinkelner. Again, that was published by Fanbase Press, and yeah, that was a big deal because that series really got a lot of it won some awards. It was nominated for some awards, but mainly the profile for that book got larger, and that actually helped me transition into film and television and writing for film and television. And so I've also been doing that, or I was until the strike, and now I'm back. And in the comic world, then I also did Black Demon for Chispa Comics, and I have a couple other things that are nothing's been announced, and that I'm just personal stuff that I'm working on in the comic book world. But that's kind of it in a nutshell up until this point.
How did you hook up with Fanbase Press? Was that personal connection, or did you reach out to them with a pitch, or what?
No, so that one, well, so I had just seen them on the Comic Con circuit. I was really happy with how, like, particularly in local cons, you would see a lot of the same people, right? So you start to develop behind the table. So you start to develop a community of people. And Fanbase Press, like, we just kept being at the same events, and sometimes we'd be tabled next to each other. So we kind of got to know each other. I think they saw that Penguins versus Possums was going pretty strong, and that it was consistent. New issues were coming out, and people were wanting them, and that we were kind of sticking with it. And so it was really, they approached us about publishing Penguins versus Possums, and I had such a good experience with them that then when Quince came about, they were the people I went to first. I figured I thought it'd be a good fit, but if they were not interested, then I was prepared to take it elsewhere. But I wanted to take it to them first because I had such a good working relationship with them on Penguins versus Possums.
What did you feel if Penguins and Possums were doing so well without Fanbase Press? What made you feel like you needed the Fanbase Press?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very specific. Anybody who's ever self-published a comic book, it's a lot of fun, and it's a hell of a lot of work. So I loved the creation part of it, and that's really what me and John and Lindsay were, doing, was creating these comics. But then beyond that was all the other work of, like, getting into comic book stores and signing up for conventions and reaching out for interviews or for reviews, or trying to just promote the work, or even with the comic book shops. Like, well, also with the comic conventions, you have to sign up for a convention, you have to get your permit, they have to do all this. There's just a lot of sort of administrative stuff that needs to happen. And if you want it to be more than just like a cool thing that you show your friends, nothing wrong with that. But if you want it to be something more, you have to do that sort of promotion. And for me, I went to all of the comic book shops in the area to see if they wanted to carry the book, because I wasn't going through Diamond. And but even with that, like, some of them will buy it outright. Some of them want to put it on consignment. So then you have to follow up and like, hey, how many books? Okay, you need more books. And they pick up the money, and it's just like a lot of work. So when Fanbase was like, oh, we'll do all that, I was like, oh my gosh, awesome, wonderful, let's do it. Let's hook up. I can just focus on doing the comic. And that 100% was the case, which was awesome. So it was very, it was great for me, to do that. The interesting thing that happened, though, was we had always had a dedicated Penguins versus Possums booth at these conventions. And suddenly we were one book on the table of Fanbase Press. And we weren't at the convention, I wasn't putting in FaceTime all day long at these conventions. I would show up for, to sign for a couple hours or whatever and leave, which was kind of cool, but you're not still making that same sort of connection that and so people would message me and be like, I couldn't find you, or whatever. And I was like, oh no, we joined Fanbase Press. Like, look for the Fanbase Press table. But everybody was looking for that big pink Penguins versus Possums sign, and like wanting to talk and catch up and like talk about the next issue, see what else we had. So that was definitely an adjustment. It still was all good. It still was great, but it was sort of this almost a learning curve between us and the people that were coming back to buy more stuff. It was a confusing, adjustment where they were like, wait, but I thought it was just your one table. And then I was like, no, and we're not actually there all day, all 3 days. So that was an interesting adjustment, but 100%, anybody who has self-published knows how much work that is, and you can understand how relieved I was that somebody else was like, no, it's okay, I'll do it. So I was like, great. And they're wonderful, and they're really good about like getting all like promoting the stuff and getting those interviews and requests and all that kind of stuff. They handle everything with the comic book conventions and the shops and
That's
everything.
good to hear, because you hear a lot of these smaller publishers don't have those kinds of resources to do all that for
Yeah.
for author. So it's
Yeah,
nice to
I've heard some
yeah.
horror stories. Yeah, sorry. I was gonna say I've heard some horror stories. Thankfully, knock on wood, I don't have any. Fanbase Press has been super awesome in my experience. So
That's great. Let me ask you, was Penguins and Possums, what was your target age for that book?
um, that's a great question, because the title sounds sort of like it's geared toward younger. But I always thought of it as like 80s PG. So like I guess what would be PG-13 probably nowadays. But that was always, I always figured like anybody 10 and up or whatever could enjoy the book. And I think it was pretty clear. I mean, even if people were captured by the name, because people would always wander by, at least the people that I saw, whatever they saw it online, I don't know what their what their response was, but when they would walk by the booth and see Penguins versus Possums, there would always be like a head tilt of like, what? That's weird. But it was pretty clear that it was not like a little kid's book or something just cute. I think that we kind of played with the cuteness of penguins, how people perceive possums, and for me, yeah, it was really. I felt like anybody over 10, maybe anybody over 12 would really love the book. So it wasn't a super narrow scope, for better or worse, but it was exactly 100% what I wanted to do, and I think very much reflects who I am as like what my sensibilities are, what my humor is, and what my sort of all the stuff that I'm interested in. I mean, there's a ton of like Star Wars epic scope, Empire versus the Rebellion. There's I love stories where hidden under our noses there's been this thing going on and we have to look for the clues, and and it's so ridiculous that it's penguins and possums that have been fighting, but that it's all leading to Armageddon and we're all going to have to choose a side to decide the fate of the world. Like that to me was just like super fun. And so even though it was funny, it was also kind of violent, and it was also at times it was like compared to like Game of Thrones, because there was just stuff happening within the factions. We always said it was a silly concept that we took very seriously. We really wanted to tell a good story, and that's something that I'm always about. Is it's always about the project, making the project as good and as cool as can be.
Now, I believe Black Demon and Verge came before Kinsey, right?
Verge definitely did. Black Demon did not. So Verge was a series that I did not create. It was done through ID Comics or Identity Comics, and I was an illustrator on that. So I did the first 2 issues. It actually was an anthology. So I did a story in each of the first 2 issues, and I was strictly an illustrator on that. That was around the time when I was trying to really. I really loved that idea. It was a story called Concrete Shoes, and I love drawing big monstrous figures. So I had a blast working on it, but that was around the time when I was really like, I'm gonna, do all these illustrator jobs, and it wasn't. I was as a creator, I had Penguins versus Possums going, and I'd also done this one-off called Crossover with my friend John, who we didn't know each other as kids, but we both created comics as kids. So we took all of these characters that we created as kids, and now as adults approached them and let our universes cross over. And we were, had grand ambitions of like, this is going to be a whole nother series. And we ended up doing a 44-page comic, and we were exhausted and went back to Penguins versus Possums. But that was around that time that I was just like really trying to dive headfirst into comics and whatever. I felt like as a creator, I had Penguins versus Possums going, so I was just taking whatever illustrator gigs I could get as well around that time. So I did a few different things around that time as an illustrator.
I guess my question is, and I could be wrong because I haven't read the book yet, but it seemed to me like Quince was more of a kid's book, and all your other work was not, even though actually Penguins and Possums could be for kids as well.
Yeah, Penguins versus Possums for me was really sort of like it wasn't intentionally inspired by the Ninja Turtles, but I feel like the vibe for me is that where like that story could go in a lot of different directions, like the Ninja Turtles did, where it could be for kids or it could be the gritty version that they did. For Quince, that was a very specific thing that I wanted to do. So I did want that geared more for a younger audience, for an all ages, but I definitely was thinking about a younger audience at that time because I think, as I mentioned, I knew I wanted to do something that highlighted my heritage, that really showed our culture in a positive light, but I didn't know what it was going to be. And then around that time, my wife and I happened to find ourselves at multiple family quinceañeras. And as I sat through them, that's where the idea came from. And it's very rooted in the culture, obviously, but it's also very much a coming of age tale, like a quince happens when you're 15. That's sort of the whole idea, is that sort of transitional time in your life. And I remember that time very distinctly, and wanting to disappear. And a quince is all about being seen, and that all of that emotion was really going through my head. And so that's when I came up with the idea. But then it was a couple of weeks later when I saw my own nieces, were Latino, running around the living room dressed as superheroes, that I really felt like, okay, I need to do this. I need to put this out into the world. And I really had them in my mind working on, and so that was the idea, was that it would be accessible. More so with Penguins versus Possums, I didn't really care. With Quince, I really wanted it to be accessible to younger readers as well. I wanted it to appeal to anyone who was in their teens, but even younger. There's so much of a like, I forget what the term for it, but like where you're thinking about being older, and so and so I really wanted that to be accessible to a younger audience as well. So it was intentional.
Got it. You noticed earlier I actually said Quince instead of Quince. And the reason why I said that's because back in the 70s there was a cartoon strip in the Philippines, spelled the same way, but we pronounce it Quince. So,
oh wow, interesting.
so that's why I don't think it's in publication anymore. But that's why I kept saying Quince instead of Quince.
That's fascinating. That's so cool.
But anyways, aside from going to Comic Cons, how else do you promote your work?
Yeah, well, when I was self-publishing, I would go on any sort of podcast I could. I'd be a part of panels. Panels are I love panels anyway, because I like sharing information. I think they're very important. But any panel at a convention never fails. Every time, by the time I get back to the table, there's a bunch of people waiting at the table. They're sort of networking as well, or maybe hopefully they were inspired by the panel and they want to check out the book. But I think that's a great way to promote your work, is to, if you're on a panel or you're in somewhere where it's you can speak publicly, or any sort of a talk back or something like that, I think is a really great way. Beyond that, I would reach out for interviews. I would reach out for reviews. And at that time, I had a whole list of sort of contacts for people who were open to doing that at different, publications or different websites or different blogs, even, anywhere that I could. I would try and spread the gospel of my comic. So that was a big thing. And at that point, even I was doing I'd put bookmarks wherever I could. I'd put postcards wherever I could. Actually, Fanbase Press had first heard of Penguins versus Possums because a theater company that I was working with let me put postcards in the front of the house. So they had actually already seen that. And so by the time they met me, they were like, oh my God, I've already heard of Penguins versus Possums. I saw it here, whatever. So I was really trying to get, as many places as I could to and I felt like, honestly, I felt like the more that I did that, the more it was just kind of putting it out into the universe of like people being just even sort of aware, like, oh yeah, I think I heard about that, and so I was doing all that kind of stuff. Let me see what else. I made t-shirts. I also did stuff that people would have fun wearing. So I'd put stuff up on, as people would buy the shirts and send me photos of them wearing the shirt out in the world. I would put that up on like our website or our blog or whatever. Like I was always trying to get people kind of invested in it and to see it out in the world. So I did t-shirts, prints. At one point I did little mini figures. Sort of just a lot of different ways for people to be just sort of interested and spread the word of penguins versus possums. Now I leave most of that to Fanbase Press for whoever's publishing the book. Chispa does the stuff for Black Demon. That's a different company, and I do what I can is just like social media, what everybody does. The thing is, I feel like so much of that, there's just so much white noise and so much just content and people constantly doing stuff. It's really hard to kind of rise above, right? It's really hard to kind of break out of that white noise and be seen. And this isn't something that you can actively do to promote, but like those award thing, getting nominated and stuff like that definitely helped kind of raise the profile of Quince, which then in turn like gets people interested in other stuff. But certainly for Quince, that was a big deal because then also libraries get interested in it because it's nominated for awards. Schools get interested in it because it's nominated for awards, all that kind of stuff. And then they're buying multiple copies for their school or their library or whatever. And they're telling their library friends or they're telling the parents of the kid who, blah, blah, blah. And so that was a huge deal for us. Like I didn't even really think about all that stuff, but it was really interesting to see it play out of like, oh my gosh, this school that I never heard of, or this library from across the country or whatever, is like, ordering books and wants to talk about, and so that's not something that you can plan for, but that's definitely something that is helpful. I also was doing an email newsletter for a little while. I get a lot of those and I don't like when they come too consistently. So I would only do it when I had actual, something big happening. But I did that and people always responded and they like, check it out. We did a Kickstarter for the first issue of Penguins versus Possums. So that also got the word out. And yeah, so it was just sort of all of those sort of grassroots things of like send out an email and go on as many, interviews. And really the thing for me when I was self-publishing was just trying to reach out to as many people as possible to interview, to review, to sell a book, to have me at a store to sign, all that kind of stuff that you don't think about. You think that's all going to come to you. I was very proactive about all of that stuff. Like I really wanted to get that stuff out there. And even if they didn't, I don't think I had anybody, maybe I had a couple that were like, no, we're not interested in carrying the book. But then I'd be like, okay, can I send you some postcards or some bookmarks or, whatever, just to kind of still kind of get it, out there into, maybe I'm from the Bay Area. So I'd reach out to the Bay Area and be like, hey, remember me? Or my old college or whatever. Hey, remember, like I would just try and do whatever thing I could to try and just amplify the projects that I was working on.
Was there an active effort on your part or fan base's part on getting nominated for awards?
On my part, no, it wasn't really something. So people had brought it up in the beginning when like a comic book shop owner had seen the first couple pages or whatever, and he was like, I just never, like people started talking about that, but that wasn't, I don't think certainly wasn't on my mind, and I don't think anybody on the creative team was really focused on that in the while making it. And then even when it was done, it was exciting to hear Fanbase talk about that stuff, and that certainly once you get nominated and stuff like then it's like exciting and stuff, but there was no active effort on my part or on the creative team's part. Fanbase Press maybe I wasn't really part of that, but certainly I believe they put it in a position where it could be considered for that type of stuff. So I'd have to they'd have to answer that, but I'm pretty sure that was also one of the joys of of the publisher. Like I don't have to worry about it, but they do so much. Like I'm sure they were, they probably were like actively being like, hey, look at this, consider this, because there still has to be, again, there's just so much stuff out there. People aren't gonna just know everything. That the best comic book ever made could be by some kid in Milwaukee who never showed anybody. You know what I mean? So like they're just not aware of everything. So I'm sure there was an effort to have it be considered. You know what I mean? I just don't know that. I don't know the intricacies of that because I wasn't involved in that.
Now, do you think there was a domino effect? Like after you got nominated for one award, that other awards would nominate you would nominate you too?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're. I mean, I think it's certainly. Again, for better or worse, whether it's true or not. I mean, I think once you get nominated for an award, people take notice and like, well, maybe there is something here, and so maybe there was a domino effect of like people were aware, or maybe it had nothing to do with it. I don't really know. Nobody ever told me one way or another, but I have to imagine that there's some sort of, even if the domino effect is subtle of like they're aware of it. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's not even necessarily like, oh, we were nominated for this, we better nominate them for our thing. It's just now they're more aware of it existing and that people have noticed it and people have invested in it or whatever. So I think it may just be a subconscious thing of like, oh, I'm aware of that book where I wouldn't have been aware of it before. If that
Now you
makes
said
sense.
earlier that after it was nominated, you were getting orders from across the country, schools and libraries, things like that. Were there any other effects on you personally as far as like opportunities or projects after
You know,
being
it's interesting.
nominated?
Yeah, I think so. I think it certainly had a positive effect. I think I didn't probably capitalize it on it as much. I have a friend or an acquaintance who I know through comic conventions and stuff, and he was like, I would have been knocking on Marvel's door and been like, look at this, I'm not, my book was nominated and stuff, and I didn't do that. I liked, honestly, I think I kind of liked making I would love to work for Marvel or DC if you're listening, please. But I wasn't pursuing that. I like doing my own projects, and that was really what I did it for. And it wasn't, to me, it never, I guess, occurred to me early on that like this is a stepping stone. It was just about the project. Like I just wanted the project to be the best it could possibly be. And I guess I was just kind of living in the joy of when it did get recognized, not just for myself, like there was a whole creative team, the publishers, like everybody involved, gets those awards. Like we all, I was happy for the project. I was happy that this thing rattling around in my brain got to live. People enjoyed it. That was really, I guess, where my mind was at the time. And now I'm like, oh, maybe I should have knocked on some doors or something. But I think the other effect is, which I still feel to this day, even with Black Demon, where people know that you did this thing, and so then you are like, oh, well, so then every like bio or whatever, right, whether I write it or someone else writes it, it's always like creator of the Eisner nominated Quince, or whatever. And like Eisner's really the only one that people recognize. Like there was other stuff that we actually won, but like Eisner is the one that everybody knows. So that's the one that is always people that hire me to do other comic book stuff. That's the one that people want on there is, that project was Eisner nominated. So I do think it had a positive effect, certainly. And I think that was also a way of, it helped me also in transitioning to film and television to have an Eisner nominated project and the IP and blah, blah, blah. So like, I think there was a lot of ways that it helped. And I think specifically your question is about comic book, like with Black Demon and for anything, like people reaching out, like there is a certain, I think it did have a positive impact because people can look at that. And like I said, then they want that on their thing. I think, of like, it's cool to be able to put that, to put that on there. That's something that you can, use to promote. I mean, everybody wants to promote, right? Everyone wants to promote their project. So that's yet another thing that makes everybody that worked on that more valuable, I think,
Is the ultimate career goal to be in comics, to be in film and television, or to straddle both?
To straddle both, absolutely. I love comic books and I've loved them since I was a kid. So that was to me not like, oh, it's a stepping stone to what I really want to do. I don't feel that way about it. But I also really love film and television. And I had a project that I was working on after Quince that I was so excited about as a comic, that I was so excited it was going to be my next graphic novel. And I started, really building it out. And I was going to do it completely on my own. And just like, it was so me. And I was doing like watercolor and charcoal and digital. And it was just like pouring myself into it. And then I was like, yeah, actually, you know what? This would also be a really cool TV show. And so I like stopped and I wrote that pilot, and then I wrote like what the show would be and partnered with a producer and a director, and we took it out and sold that. And so then I don't know if I can ever make that comic book, because then the rights to all of that go to the place that bought it. But it ultimately with that, like I was like satisfied, because I was like, oh well, as long as it's out in the world, you know what I mean? But I still have a real desire to do comics as well. Like that was a difficult decision of like, my lawyer being like, well, you may not be able to do that comic book now. And I ultimately was like, that's fine. I want to do this TV show. But it's, to me, like there's people that do comics and you can tell it's just a pitch for something else. Or there's people that do it and you can tell like, they really want to do the film and TV or whatever. And that's fine. But for me, when I was a kid, and I mentioned before, not having a ton of friends, comics were a huge sort of escape for me and really captured me as an artist and as a storyteller. The energy, particularly in, those 90s comics, like I was just totally captivated by. And that's what like I said, that's the first thing I ever wanted to be when I grew up, was somebody who made comic books. So I always want to be able to do both. The real of it is, for me, because I don't work for Marvel or DC, there's not a lot of money in it. You know what I mean? Like I love telling the stories, but and that's something that I was actually surprised by in getting involved in comics. There were people that I thought were very successful that they would say like, oh yeah, well, I also have my day job or whatever. And I was like, what? And now having did it, I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. I totally get it. Like it's hard to, like I said, unless you're, in a certain echelon, like it's really hard to just do that. And so for me, it's about doing any creative thing I can do to make my life and my career, and to get these stories out of my head, and put my heart either on paper or up on the screen or whatever. That's where my mind is at. Like to me, those things have always been connected. I think I mentioned like visual storytelling, like that's just something I love. And so I hope to always be able to do both. It's just about finding the time to be able to do everything. But yeah, that's my dream, is to be able to do all of those things.
What's something, what is an aspect of making comics that really draws you to it, in contrast to an aspect of film and television?
Sure. Well, so comics brings me back to being a kid, like where I was just making my own stories, drawing them on 8.5 by 11 and stapling together and creating a universe, right? And even now, doing comic books, there's something fundamentally different about that. You can do certain things in comics that you can't do in film and television. Time works different in comics than it does in film and television, but also making a comic book, you have a lot more, particularly if you self-publish or you have a small press publisher, you have a lot more control over what that thing is and making it your thing, depending upon how many people you're working with and all that kind of stuff. But you can really make it your thing, and it can happen quickly. It can happen in, I want to make a comic book. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to make a comic book, I'm going to print it out, I'm going to take it to a convention or a shop or whatever. Boom, that thing is done. It's out in the world. It exists. It's something you can point to. Even if that's the only comic book you ever make in your life, you can put that up on your shelf and be like, I did that. You can, speaking from experience, you can write a movie or do a thing and it not get produced. It just be a thing that you did, that you got paid for, but that you never see out in the world. No one ever sees it. You never see it. It is never a like tangible thing, because there's so many other people that are involved. There's a lot of money involved, but there's just so many other sort of people between you and the realization of that thing, in my experience. So to be able to do a comic, you can do that. You know what I mean? Like you can actually make that happen and make that thing a tangible thing that exists in the world. That thing that's been rattling in your brain or tugging at your heart, that's a thing that you can actually create and put out into the world, and you are in control of that. And with with film and television, that's a lot more difficult. There's a lot more hands on it. There's a lot more people looking for a lot more reasons to say no because of the money or whatever reason. So that's one huge difference, I think, between comics and film and television, because so much of it is about completing a thing and letting it live. And I think that's a really valuable thing with comics. It's also a great medium. I just really love it. There's a certain energy and dynamic to comics that you're probably not going to find in most film and television. And I like that. I read some comics digitally, but I like having a tangible thing that I can flip through. And if I'm, it's easier to flip a page back than to like rewind an hour to be like, wait, what was that about? So there's definitely that sort of like enjoyment aspect of consuming it for me as well.
Any plans to take Quince to Hollywood?
Man, I would love it. Like I think I mentioned, it was actually something that did help me branch into Hollywood. Not too much to be said about it beyond that, but it's certainly the Quince. I'll just say Quince helped me get my Writers Guild card, and so we'll see what happens. I really hope so. I really hope that comes to fruition, because when I first thought up the idea, I thought, there's certain projects where I think this is true, and there's certain projects where it needs to be one particular thing. But with Quince, I thought, man, this would be a really great movie, or this would be a really great animated, or this would be a really great comic. And it really came down to like, I know how to make a comic, and I think I want to put this out into the world, and I want, and so we made the best comic we could possibly make. But I always hoped that Quince would find a life beyond the pages of the comic book. So fingers crossed that still happens.
I'm going to ask one more quick question and I'll open up to the audience. Do you work with an agent? And comics? I'm assuming you work with an agent in film and TV, but what about comics?
For comics, no. So for comics, everything I've done in comics has been either I've gone out and gotten, or for Black Demon, in the case of Black Demon, that production company who partnered with Stout to create Chispa comics, that production company I had worked with before, so they reached out to me for Black Demon. But that's how all of it has come so far, is like just to me directly. When I signed with my agency for film and television, they did say, hey, we have a graphic novel department if you end up wanting to go that route or whatever. But currently I do not have a comic book agent, so I can't really speak to that.
What do they mean by they have a graphic novel department?
So like each agency has like, it's usually divided in like, a lot of people will have like a film agent or a features agent. They'll have a TV agent. They'll have I don't know, if they do novels, maybe they'll have a literary agent through that. So I think that's what they were getting, as they have a department that focuses more on that. Some departments focus more on animation, I think that's what they were getting at. It was when I first met them, and I didn't really pursue it yet, but was that they have within their agency people that specialize just in graphic novels and comics and stuff like that.
Meaning getting your work in graphic novels.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. So anyway, now I'd like to open it up to the audience. If anybody has any questions for Sebastian, now's the time. Go ahead, Jay.
Sebastian, thanks for being with us. My question would be, how do you balance the actual creative work and the hustle? Because it sounds like you're pretty good at the hustle. Sounds like, you're out there, but like, are you able to balance it out so you're doing creative work and the hustle at the same time? Or do you feel like one takes over the other?
That is an awesome question. That is a great question. And because I think it's a never-ending battle to find that balance for everyone, right? What helps me usually with the balance is money. Helps me feel like, okay, I can focus a little bit more on the creative rather than the hustle for this moment in time, because I can pay my bills or whatever, that where it gets harder is like, I really need to hustle because I really need to, this thing to happen or that thing to happen. And I think you can never sit or, rest on your laurels, or, I think you can never let go of the hustle, even with agents or anything like that. Like, I think you still need to keep your hustle. Same thing with like, I know I was like, oh, everything to fan-based press, and they've been amazing. But I think for your own personal career and your own personal stuff, like, you still need to be hustling, looking for the next thing, or getting your project out there. So that's a really great question, because I think it's really difficult to find that balance. Even when I started Penguins versus Possums, when we were self-publishing, I had a day job, and so I would work that job. I would come home, and then we weren't married yet, but the woman who became my wife, I'd spend some time with her. We'd eat dinner. We'd maybe watch an hour of TV. And then I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go work on the comic. And so then I'd work on the comic from like 9 o'clock at night until midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And then I'd get up and I'd go to do the job all over again. And I couldn't wait to get home. And I'd have those same couple of hours. And then I'd go work on my comic. And I did that, for quite a while, until I was like, maybe I need to, again, find a little balance with my relationship, or with like my work, or just taking a break, like any of those things. It's a constant sort of calibration, I think, of those things within any one person's life. But I will say, specifically what you're talking about with the creative and the hustle, I think you need to also, something that helps me is divvying up the time that I have, of like, okay, I need to work on the comic from this time to this time. Because you can also just hustle, and then they're like, great, where's the comic? And you're like, I didn't have time to do it because I was hustling this whole time. So you still have to find time to do the creative thing. And that also hopefully fuels you to do the hustle, because then your creative juices are flowing, and you're feeling like there's actually something at the end of the rainbow. I'm actually doing something here. So for me, I think it's just a self-calibration or a self-check-in rather, of like, okay, am I getting the comic book done? Is it what I want it to be? And at the same time, finding those times when you can hustle. I also found time at work, my day job, to hustle, where like, when there was downtime, I could get on there and start hustling about, hey, here's a new issue, right? Whatever, lunchtime, I was always finding kind of those little pockets of time to get that stuff done. Because usually when you're doing something creative, right, whether it's writing or illustrating or whatever, you need kind of some dedicated time. It's a lot harder. I learned this also when my son was born, and like I ended up getting this gig of illustrating some of the kids' educational comics, and I was like, oh, well, I'll just like draw like while he's a newborn baby, and I was like, oh, this is impossible, and so I had to, even with that, be like, okay, I'm gonna dedicate this time to my child, and I'll dedicate this time to like drawing some stuff, but yeah, I think that, again, I think it's such a good question. I don't have a good answer for it, except that I'm constantly trying. And for me, it's about carving out time and dedicating time, and not being overwhelmed by either one of those things, the hustle or the creative. They have to complement each other, in my mind.
If I can ask, I mean, what kind of a day job did you have, or what industry was it in?
Sure. I've had many. At that time, I was working for Warner Brothers in nothing creative. I was an accounting assistant. I was thankful to have the job. I did not. I was not put on. I felt I was not put on this earth to do that. I am not good at it. I'm not great at it. I did my job to the best of my ability. But yeah, at that point, I was doing that. But I will say, it did help me, because I was at Warner Brothers. I got to meet creative heads of shows. So I got to meet like an art department head, or a set deck head, or a prop head, and show them my stuff, and show them Penguins versus Possums, show them some artwork that I did. And so I was actually able to then get hired to do some illustrations for different shows, or to get, oh, we need this for props, or oh, we need this for set deck. Can you draw it? Oh, we need some costumes for this. Can we use your Penguins versus Possums? Yeah. And they paid for all that stuff. So I was able to do that, and then they're more aware of Penguins versus Possums. And funny story, they were really awesome. This group of people on Two Broke Girls, if you remember that sitcom, but they had an episode where there was a gaming convention, and they made an entire Penguins versus Possums booth. It's not a video game, but they made an entire Penguins versus Possums booth. And I got to, and they paid for all of that. And I got to provide a lot of the artwork for that. They even let me be an extra. So I got to like man the booth. And they ended up giving me a bunch of that stuff. They were super cool, super supportive. They, that led to, there's an episode of Hawaii Five-0 where they're looking at Penguins versus Possums figurines, and an episode of I don't know, Man with a Plan. Like, there's just like a bunch of stuff where, like, because those department heads worked on various shows, it led to, Penguins versus Possums at the time being on different shows. Like, there was a whole booth right behind the two main people. They even dressed somebody as a penguin with a rocket pack. Like there was a whole thing, and it was just like, it totally, I'll never forget that. It was so kind of them to be supportive in that way. And it totally, then you can like go to the table, right, and be like, as seen on TV, Penguins versus Possums, and people are like, oh my gosh, wow, you're legit, So
You weren't worried about any rights or copyright or anything like that.
They no, because they have forms that you sign that deal with all of that. Of like, they're just able to put it up. I guess to answer your question, I was originally concerned, but because of the paperwork, that's like, they have the right to just show it on that episode of whatever. It can still be something else. It could still, so thankfully, if I read the paperwork right, I'm still safe. But yeah, that's a great question. But yeah, they have paperwork for all that stuff so that they could just put it on the show and that's it.
I think the fact that they did all that for you is a testament to how likable you are as a person, which I think goes a long way in this industry, whether people, want to work with you or not. So,
thank you.
Any other questions, guys?
Yes. Hi, my name is Marcel. It's great to be here. So you had talked about Chispa Comics. So first, is that solely focused on stories from Hispanic and Latino writers? And are there any other sort of groups like that someone like me should be aware of?
So yes, so the Chispa Comics is basically the Latina arm of Scout Comics. So Mucho Más Media partnered with Scout Comics, which is another publisher, and created Chispa Comics. That's the only one that I personally know of, in terms of really catering towards Hispanic and Latino creators and writers and illustrators. They have multiple books coming out. So I would definitely look into them. I would encourage you to look into them. And I have friends that I've met in the indie comics circuit that I knew prior to Chispa existing, and then now they have done a couple things with Chispa as well. So that's their whole like focus. That's their whole aim, is to really get those voices heard. So and to speak to that community. So I would absolutely recommend looking into them. As far as others like that, there may very well be. I'm just not aware. I also recommend Comadres y Comics. They're a podcast that really focuses again on the sort of Latinx comics and just creators and creatives and whatnot. So I recommend them as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, I had one.
Go ahead, Omar.
So I'm also in the Bay Area, so I'm shocked that I've never run into you in the last 10, 12 years. I've been running the circuit as well. Are you still in the Bay Area, or are you in LA?
No, I'm in LA full time. So the only time I go back to the Bay Area is to visit some family that's still up there. Gotcha. But I still consider myself a Bay Area boy, but I have been in LA for a while. So there was I think I'm originally from San Jose, so there's a convention up there. I feel like it was called Big Wow or something. I never made it up. Yeah, I never made it up there. My brother went, but I never made it up in the.
I did that show, and when it was still Big Wow, and then they changed it, and now it's like a science/entertainment show. Anyway, it was a great show though, Big Wow, for when it was known as that. I'm just curious where we could find you online. Like, are you on LinkedIn and all those, types of networking sites?
Yeah, I've given up or abandoned most of them. But you can find it for my own mental health. But you can find me on Instagram. Sebastian Artist is my handle there. That's pretty much it. I've left most things. I'm on Facebook. Sebastian Makes Comics. But that's pretty much it. I mean, you can definitely reach out to me, and if you want to, get my information, I'm always happy, kind of offline. I'm always happy to talk to people about this stuff. Like in terms of networking and all that stuff. As soon as I signed with, or not signed with, but as soon as I joined Fanbase Press, that list of contacts and stuff that I had, I started just handing that out to anybody who would ask, because I had it as updated as I could, and anybody I could. My point is just I'm always here and always happy to talk about it. I just don't have a huge online presence at the moment.
Sure.
I'm on Instagram mainly, and then occasionally Facebook.
All right, man. I'll hit you up. Go Dubs, huh?
Cool, for sure. For sure.
Let me ask you, Sebastian, is there any interaction on your part or any attention at all of your work from down south?
Man, I almost did. There was a convention called GammaCon, and it's mainly, I guess, a gaming convention. But they had invited me to be there for Quince. But that's the only one that I was invited to. I couldn't make it, unfortunately. I had something else come up. But so I guess that was a long-winded way of saying no.
Where was it going to be?
It was in Mexico, but it was in Mexicali. It was in Mexicali. So but yeah, I unfortunately couldn't attend. But that was the only time I was invited. I assume that's what you meant by down south.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, maybe I completely understood and you meant Georgia.
No, that's what I meant. Right. Because they do have events down there, because I see some of my friends going down, and they're not even Latinx creators. They're just like regular, regular creators, and they're going down there. So
yeah, that was the only one that I've ever been invited to, at least thus far, and I couldn't even make it. But I hope so. I would love to. I'd love to go be more involved in that. But
guys, any more questions? Okay. Let's gonna do the last question. Usually I'll ask something like, mundane, like, do you have any career advice? Something like that. Or what I've also asked is, what are some brutally honest advice you would give to a budding creator? But I'd like to try a new question tonight for you. Okay. What is do you have any kind of a philosophy when it comes to being in a career in comics that you could share?
I think this is true for me. I've found it in this year where it's been a strike year in film and television. I found to just do the things, to create the things that really you feel compelled to do. There's a lot of sort of I've seen people kind of chase a dragon or chase an idea of a dream or whatever, and I guess I would just say, create the thing that you feel like you need to put out into the world. Not everything needs to be super heavy or whatever. It could be something fun that you feel like you are compelled to make. But I think just those are the things. Like, those are the things that always come back to me. That's what Quince was. It rattled around in my brain and my heart for a while before it came to fruition. And I think that doing those things that bring you joy in the doing of them is what's most important. And I'll speak specifically to comics. As I mentioned, there's not always a lot of money to be found. And I think that, even very well-known or very successful comic creators or illustrators or writers or whatever, they're only known by a certain, number of people and stuff. I mean, there's just this idea of like, once you do a thing, everything will be good and everything will be perfect. And I don't think that's true. So I just think that whatever your project is, find the joy in the doing of it. And like I said, even if you only ever do one, but it's one story that's just been dying to get out of you, do it. You can do it, and you'll have it on your bookshelf to be like, I did that thing. And even if you never do another thing, I think you can always be proud of having done that. I think there's also people that get paralyzed by wanting it to be perfect. So they never start it. Or even from like after Quince, I was like, oh, well, now the next one needs to be at a certain level. And I finally just got past that. And I was like, just do the thing that's personal to you, that you love, that you want to do, that you'll enjoy telling that story or putting those hours in on it. It's, you know, it takes time and effort to, whether you're a writer, an artist, or whatever. Like, so as it takes time, you should enjoy the thing that you're doing. I guess that's all I can say about that as in terms of a philosophy.
That's great. You know, I've been wanting to do comic books since I was a kid, and it's probably only the last couple of years that I've come to the realization that it's not always a viable full-time job that pays you a full-time salary. You know, probably up until about 5 years ago, I thought, you know, you could get into comics and support a family. So
yeah, no, it's a rude awakening. And I mean, you're talking about like being brutally honest, like it's true. You know, I mean, I think I had the same, you know, oh, the next Eastman and Laird, or the next, you know, whatever. And it's like for that one story, there's a lot of other stories where it didn't work out that way. So I think that's just something to definitely keep in mind. And so enjoy what you're doing, you know, enjoy what you're doing.
Let me ask you, from the time you started thinking about the idea of Quince to the time it hit the shelf, how long did it take?
Oh man, it was like years, because when my let me see, to when it actually came out, probably 3 or 4 years.
That's not bad.
It's not horrible. I mean, well, nothing's horrible. If it takes forever, I mean, honestly, Penguins Were Possible was probably a longer gestation period. But like for Quince, it was an idea that was sort of evolving. Like I said, I was going to these Quinces and I was like, this is what I want to do. And then I saw my nieces, and it just kind of kept evolving. And then in working with collaborators on it, you know, takes even more shape. But it just, I think the reason that even something like 4 years, maybe it was longer, but something like 4 or 5 years, like the reason that can feel like a very long time is because there's something inside you that wants to get out. But I think those are the projects that really interest me, are the ones that don't leave me alone. You know what I mean? Like, you can have a million ideas, but those ones that like stick with you and are like, why haven't you done me yet? Why haven't you created me yet? Like that was what Quince was. Like that was it took a while for it to get to what it was meant to be. You know what I mean?
Well, thank you very much for answering all our questions and for being here tonight and sharing your time with us. And hopefully I'll get to meet you in person on one of these conventions.
Absolutely.
I try to go back to Long Beach as often as I can. I might go back for the holidays. My cousins have been hinting that we should have a reunion, so we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, let me know. I'm around. So
anyways, again, thank you. Please give a round of applause to Sebastian for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
And again, and I will let you guys know when all this is posted. We are going to have a panel discussion on why we don't have a union in this industry. I think it's November 2nd, but I'll be posting it on the meetup page probably the next day or two. I'm just finalizing one more panelist. Sebastian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, I'm so glad we're able to get you on. Everybody, have a nice night. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.